Yes, clear.
What follows is a voice recording found on a personal audio device in Anchorage, Alaska. The device was recovered from a small fishing boat docked at the Seward Harbor on October 15, 2028. The owner never returned to claim it. The voice belongs to Marcus Webb, a commercial fisherman. 53 years old, born and raised in Alaska. Third generation. His grandfather fished these same waters during World War II, back when Japanese forces occupied the Aleutian Islands and American soldiers died on frozen rocks most people had never heard of. Marcus recorded this message approximately 1 hour after sunrise on October 12, 2028. He was alone on his boat, the Sarah May, named after his late wife. He had been checking his crab pots in the Gulf of Alaska, about 40 miles southwest of Seward. The recording begins with the sound of wind and water, then his voice. Steady at first, then not. This is what he said.
I don't know who's going to hear this. Maybe nobody. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But I need to say it out loud to hear my own voice, to know I'm still real. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm on my boat, the Sarah May. Position, roughly 40 miles southwest of Seward. It's October 12th, a little past 7 in the morning. The sun's been up for about an hour, but it feels colder than it should. I've fished these waters for 32 years. I know their moods, their sounds. The chop of a distant Coast Guard rotor, the echo of tourist seaplanes, the low hum of tankers crawling up the Gulf. Out here, silence has a rhythm, and I know when that rhythm breaks. What I saw this morning didn't belong here. I was pulling up my third pot when I heard it, a low vibration at first, like thunder under the sea. But the sky was perfectly clear, not a cloud. Just that deep, glassy blue we get in early autumn, so sharp it hurts your eyes. The sound grew louder, coming from everywhere at once. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a storm. It was deeper, heavier. Then I saw them. Ships, warships, dozens of them, slicing north through calm water. We see Navy vessels sometimes training runs, Arctic routes, but never like this. Never this many. There must have been 30, maybe 40, destroyers, cruisers, and carriers, huge, silent things, gray as winter stone, the kind of size that makes you feel small without understanding why. Even from miles away, I could feel their presence like pressure on my chest. They moved fast, too fast for ships that size. The formation was perfect, tight, deliberate. Every angle screamed purpose. This wasn't an exercise. For 20 minutes, they passed. Some close enough that I could see crew moving like shadows along the decks. Nobody waved. Nobody looked my way. Just a wall of steel heading north. When the last one disappeared into the haze, I thought it was over. I remember thinking I'd go home, call my brother, tell him what I saw. Maybe it'd make the evening news. Then I heard it, the second sound. At first, it was only a whisper, high and distant, almost like wind slipping through a crack. Then it deepened, mechanical, constant. I looked up, and there they were. Black triangles cutting through the blue. Sleek, precise, silent, flying in a perfect V. A dozen of them at least, maybe more. Too high to see clearly, but the sun caught their edges sharp and unnatural. Stealth bombers, no doubt about it. They were heading north, same direction as the fleet. I watched until they faded into the sky. Thought that had to be the end of it. But the sound didn't stop. It grew, the horizon shimmered, and then came more. Another wave of aircraft. Some were the same shape, others were different, larger, stranger. Angular designs that didn't belong to anything I'd ever seen. They moved in tight formations, groups of 4, 6, 8. I tried counting. I reached 47 before I lost track. They kept coming for over an hour. The sky was alive, filled with contrails and motion. The air trembled. Between the bombers darted smaller craft drones, hundreds of them, moving like a swarm, weaving and circling the larger planes. They moved with purpose, like a living thing, all heading north, toward the Arctic, toward the pole, toward Russia. I've lived through the Cold War. I remember the drills in school, the talk of nuclear winter, the quiet fear that everyone carried. But this wasn't fear. This was something colder, final. When it finally ended, the sky went still again. My coffee was cold, my legs numb. The horizon looked ordinary, but the silence had weight. Even when the sound was gone, I could still feel it inside me. That mechanical thunder. I reached for my phone. No signal, not even one bar. Tried the radio, nothing but static. The weather channel was dead. That's when I knew this wasn't just up here. The whole network was down. Something massive was happening, and it was already too late to stop it. I'm heading back to port. I don't know what I'll find there. I don't know if anyone will even be there to listen, but I know what I saw. I saw America going to war. Not the kind you see on television, with speeches and news anchors. The real kind. The kind that moves in silence and shadow before anyone knows it's begun. My grandfather fought in the Second World War. He told me once the most frightening thing he ever saw wasn't the enemy. It was the scale of what America could build once it decided to fight. Ships by the hundreds, planes by the thousands, factories that never slept. He said that when the machine wakes up, nothing on earth can stop it. I used to think he was exaggerating. Now I understand. This morning, I saw that machine wake up again. I saw its gears turning, its shadow stretching across the sky and sea. And I have a feeling this time, it's not going back to sleep.
The recording ends there. Static, then silence. Marcus Webb's boat was found 3 days later, still docked at Seward. The engine was cold. The deck was clean. His gear was stowed properly, everything in order. But Marcus was gone. The Coast Guard searched for 2 weeks. They found nothing. His brother Robert gave a statement to local authorities. He said Marcus called him that morning from a payphone in Seward. Said he'd seen something he couldn't explain. Said he needed to go somewhere quiet and think. That was the last anyone heard from him. The audio device was found in the boat's cabin, tucked inside a waterproof bag with a note. The note read, "If you find this, make sure people know what I saw. Make sure they know it was real." On October 12th, 2028, at approximately 6:47 a.m. Alaska Standard Time, a combined U.S. Navy fleet departed from positions in the North Pacific, heading toward the Bering Strait. At the same time, the United States Air Force launched Operation Northern Thunder, the largest strategic bomber deployment since the Second World War. Over 400 aircraft participated in the first wave alone. Marcus Webb was one of fewer than a dozen civilians who witnessed the deployment from the ground. Most were fishermen, Coast Guard personnel, or residents of remote coastal villages. None of them were prepared for what they saw. And none of them could have known that what Marcus witnessed that morning was not the full extent of American military power. It wasn't even close. To understand what Marcus Webb witnessed that morning, you need to understand geography. You need to understand the mathematics of distance, the curves of the earth, and the cold logic of war. Alaska sits at the edge of America, but it sits at the center of everything else. Look at a globe, not a flat map, a globe. Put your finger on Anchorage. Now trace a line north. over the Arctic, down toward Moscow. That line is 4,800 miles, a straight shot over the top of the world. Now trace a line from anywhere else in America to Moscow. From New York, it's 5,000 miles, but you have to go over the Atlantic, over Europe, through airspace controlled by nations that might not let you pass. From California, it's 6,200 miles over the Pacific, requiring multiple refueling stops. But from Alaska, over the pole, you can reach the heart of Russia in less than 7 hours. No permission needed, no allies required, just open sky, frozen ocean, and the certainty of physics. This is called the Great Circle Route. It is the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere. Airline pilots use it every day to save fuel. Strategic planners use it to deliver death. During the Cold War, both sides knew this. The Soviets built radar stations across their northern coast. America put missile silos in Alaska. Both sides aimed over the pole because both sides understood that when the moment came, this was the path war would take. What neither side fully understood was how much had changed since then. Operation Northern Thunder was not planned in weeks or months. It was planned over years, quietly, carefully, hidden inside routine exercises and normal deployments. The United States military knew that if war came with the Sino-Russian coalition, it would not be won by first strikes or decapitation attacks. Modern air defense systems were too good. Satellite surveillance too thorough. Any massive buildup would be detected weeks in advance, so they did something different. They built the capability to appear from nowhere. The bomber force that Marcus saw was not staged from a few large bases. It came from everywhere. From civilian airports converted overnight, from stretches of highway reinforced to handle heavy aircraft, from bases that did not officially exist on any public record. The B-2 Spirit bombers, those black flying triangles, each cost $2 billion. America built 21 of them. For decades, people said that was wasteful, too expensive, too few aircraft to matter. What people did not know was that America had also built the B-21 Raider, a newer design, smaller, cheaper, easier to produce, and they built over 200 of them in secret. The program was hidden inside black budgets and classified appropriations. The aircraft were assembled in modular facilities scattered across 12 states. Each facility built different components. No single factory made a complete aircraft. The final assembly happened in underground hangars that satellite imagery could not penetrate. When Marcus saw those formations flying north, he was looking at the largest stealth bomber force ever assembled. But he was only seeing the first wave. At the same moment, Marcus stood on his boat, watching the sky fill with aircraft. Similar scenes were unfolding around the world. In Guam, the sound of jet engines woke every person on the island. 60 B-1B Lancers, aircraft that could carry the payload of an entire squadron of fighters, launched in sequence, one every 90 seconds. They headed west toward the South China Sea. In Diego Garcia, a tiny island in the Indian Ocean that most people have never heard of, B-52 Stratofortresses took off in the darkness. These aircraft were older than the pilots flying them. Some had been in service for 70 years, but they worked. They carried weapons, and they could reach targets across Asia that nothing else could touch. In Britain, at RAF Fairford, American bombers that had been quietly positioned over the previous month began their engines. They would hit targets in western Russia, coordinating with the northern assault Marcus had witnessed. In total, Operation Northern Thunder involved over 800 aircraft in the first 12 hours. 800 bombers, tankers, support craft, and drones. all moving simultaneously toward targets across Russia and China. But the bombers were only part of it. The naval deployment Marcus saw was Carrier Strike Group 9, 11, and 15, operating together for the first time. 3 carrier battle groups represented over 30 warships, 200 aircraft, and 15,000 personnel. They were heading toward the Bering Strait, the narrow passage between Alaska and Russia. Their mission was not to invade, it was to close the door. Once those carriers reached position, nothing would move through the Arctic without American permission. No submarines, no surface ships, no supply convoys. The entire northern approach to Russia would be sealed. At the same time, in the Atlantic, 4 more carrier groups were moving into position off the coast of Norway. In the Pacific, another 6 groups formed a line from Japan to the Philippines. 13 carrier strike groups. America had 11 in total, people thought. That was what the public numbers said. But those numbers were wrong. 2 of the carrier groups that deployed on October 12th were built in secret. Smaller designs, optimized for drone operations rather than manned aircraft. They cost less. They required smaller crews, and they had been constructed in shipyards that officially closed years ago. The scale of the deception was extraordinary. For over a decade, America had been building a military force in the shadows. Not the one shown in parades or discussed in Congress. A different force, larger, more distributed, designed specifically for the kind of war everyone said would never happen. And it was not just ships and aircraft. Across the continental United States, on that same October morning, something else was happening. Something Marcus could not see from his boat in Alaska. In a warehouse district outside Detroit, a building that had been manufacturing automobile parts for the past 5 years stopped its normal production. Within 3 hours, the same assembly lines were producing drone components. The transition was seamless. The machinery had been designed from the beginning to do both. In Pennsylvania, a facility that made agricultural equipment switched to artillery shells. In Texas, a plant that built commercial satellites began producing military reconnaissance systems. In Nevada, California, Washington, Arizona, and 20 other states, factories that had been doing civilian work revealed their true purpose. They had always been dual-use facilities, built with military specifications, staffed by workers with security clearances they did not know they needed, waiting for the signal to convert. That signal came at 5 a.m. Eastern Time on October 12th. By noon, over 200 facilities across America had switched to military production. They did not ramp up slowly. They did not retool gradually. They simply flipped a switch and began producing weapons at full capacity. The industrial mobilization that took America 18 months in World War II happened in less than 6 hours. This was possible because the infrastructure had been prepared years in advance. The machinery was already in place. The supply chains were already established. The workers were already trained. Everything was ready. It just needed to be activated. China and Russia had no idea. Their intelligence agencies had been watching for military buildup. They monitored shipyards and aircraft factories. They tracked troop movements and equipment deliveries. They saw what they expected to see. Normal peacetime operations. No cause for alarm. They did not know that the automobile plant was also a drone factory. They did not know that the civilian airport could handle B-21 bombers. They did not know that half of America's industrial capacity was designed to convert to military production at a moment's notice. By the time they realized what was happening, the first wave was already in the air. Russian air defense systems detected the bomber formations approximately 2 hours after Marcus saw them. The radar operators could not believe what they were seeing. The screens showed hundreds of contacts, all converging on Russian airspace from multiple directions. They assumed it was a system malfunction. No attack force could be that large without being detected during staging. But it was not a malfunction. The bombers did not come from large, obvious bases. They came from everywhere and nowhere. They had been dispersed across the Arctic and North America in small groups, hidden in locations that satellites had dismissed as unimportant. When the order came, they simply took off and converged. Chinese satellites detected the carrier movements in the Pacific, but by the time the images were analyzed and distributed to decision makers, the carriers were already in position. There was no time to respond, no time to reposition forces, no time to do anything except watch as the most powerful navy ever assembled formed a blockade that could not be broken. In Moscow, the Russian General Staff convened an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. local time. They had reports of massive American bomber formations, reports of naval deployments, reports of industrial mobilization on a scale not seen since World War II. The question they asked themselves was the same question Chinese leadership was asking in Beijing. How did we not see this coming? The answer was simple. They saw what America wanted them to see. For years, American military doctrine had emphasized flexibility and speed. Quick reaction forces, rapid deployment, light footprint, every public document, every strategic review, every testimony before Congress emphasized these principles, and it was all a deception. While America publicly pursued quick reaction forces, they were quietly building the infrastructure for total war. While they talked about light footprints, they were preparing to put boots on the ground by the millions. While they emphasized technology over mass, they were designing factories that could produce both. The entire American strategic posture had been a lie, a carefully constructed facade that hid the truth. America had been preparing for World War III since the day World War II ended. They never stopped. They just got better at hiding it. Operation Northern Thunder was not a hastily assembled response to a crisis. It was the execution of a plan that had been refined for 80 years. Every element had been tested. Every contingency had been prepared for. Every possible response had been war-gamed 1,000 times. And when the moment came, it worked exactly as designed. Marcus Webb stood on his boat and watched a tiny fraction of it unfold. He saw 30 ships when there were hundreds more. He saw 200 aircraft when there were thousands. He saw the beginning of something so vast, so overwhelming, that even those who planned it could barely comprehend the totality of it. What Marcus felt in that moment, that bone-deep fear, was the correct response. Because he understood, even if he could not articulate it, what he was really witnessing. He was watching America stop pretending. The bombers Marcus Webb saw disappear over the northern horizon at 8:47 a.m. Alaska time. Were traveling at 550 miles per hour at an altitude of 42,000 feet. At that speed, at that altitude, they would cross the Arctic Ocean in approximately 4 hours. They would reach Russian airspace at 12:47 p.m. Alaska time, 4:47 a.m. Moscow time, October 13th, 30 minutes before sunrise. The planners had chosen this timing carefully. Dawn attacks have a psychological weight that midnight strikes do not. There is something about watching destruction arrive with the morning light. Something that breaks the human spirit in ways darkness cannot. But more importantly, dawn meant tired radar operators, shift changes. The moment when human attention is at its lowest. When mistakes are made. When the mind wants to believe that the screen is showing an error rather than the end of the world. The Russian strategic rocket forces detected the first formations at 2:17 a.m. Moscow time. Colonel Dmitry Volkov was the senior officer on duty at the early warning center, buried beneath 300 feet of granite in the Ural Mountains. He had been in this room for 19 years. He had seen false alarms. He had seen equipment malfunctions. He had seen migrating geese show up on radar as incoming missiles. What he saw on his screen at 2:17 a.m. was none of those things. The display showed 127 contacts approaching from the north. Large aircraft, moving in coordinated formations, altitude profiles consistent with strategic bombers. Volkov stared at the screen for 15 seconds without speaking. Then he picked up the phone that connected directly to Moscow. Within 8 minutes, every air defense system in northern Russia was brought to full alert. SA-21 Growler missile batteries swiveled toward the Arctic. Fighter squadrons at a dozen bases were scrambled. Early warning radars that had been in standby mode came online, their beams sweeping the sky, and they confirmed what Volkov had seen. The Americans were coming. 3,000 miles to the east, in the underground command center beneath Beijing, a similar scene was unfolding. General Li Chen, deputy commander of the People's Liberation Army Air Force, received the alert at 8:34 a.m. Beijing time. Satellite reconnaissance had detected massive American naval movements in the Pacific. Multiple carrier groups converging on the first island chain. B-1 bombers launching from Guam. Fighter wings deploying forward to bases in Japan and South Korea. General Li had fought in 3 border conflicts. He had commanded air operations over the South China Sea. He had trained for scenarios like this his entire career, but he had never seen anything on this scale. He ordered immediate dispersal of aircraft from coastal bases, ordered the 2nd Artillery Corps, China's strategic missile force, to full readiness, ordered the Eastern Theater Command to assume war posture, and then he did something he had never done before in his career. He called his wife and told her to take their daughter and drive west, as far west as she could get, into the interior, away from the coast, away from the cities. She asked him what was happening. He told her he loved her and hung up. By 3 a.m. Moscow time, the Russian air defense network had a clear picture of the threat. There were not 127 aircraft. There were 342. The initial count had only captured the lead formations. As the bombers spread out across the Arctic approach, as more radars came online, as the early warning network synchronized its data, the true scale became apparent. 342 American strategic bombers were converging on Russian airspace from multiple vectors. From the north over the pole, from the east over the Bering Sea, from the west over Scandinavia. It was the largest strategic bombing raid in history, and Russia's air defense network, sophisticated as it was, could not stop it. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Russia had approximately 1,500 operational surface-to-air missile launchers spread across the largest country on Earth. Each launcher carried between 4 and 16 missiles depending on the system. Against 342 bombers, each carrying long-range cruise missiles that could be launched from hundreds of miles away, the defense had to achieve a near-perfect intercept rate. No air defense system in history had ever achieved that. The Russian fighters scrambled to intercept, but they faced an impossible equation. The bombers were spread across a front 2,000 miles wide. Russian fighters, even at maximum speed, could not reach their intercept points before the bombers launched their weapons. And even if they could, the escorts would be waiting. At 3:42 a.m. Moscow time, Russian radar detected the second wave. Smaller contacts, faster, moving in swarms around the bomber formations, drones, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. These were not the large reconnaissance drones Russia was familiar with. These were something new, smaller, more numerous, flying in coordinated patterns that no human pilot could maintain. Combat AI drones, autonomous fighters designed to sweep ahead of the bombers and destroy anything that threatened them. A MiG-31 interceptor from the 174th Fighter Regiment reached intercept position at 3:56 a.m. The pilot, Captain Alexei Sokolov, had visual contact with the American formation at 80 kilometers. He armed his R-37 long-range missiles and achieved radar lock. Before he could fire, his aircraft was hit by 3 simultaneous attacks from different vectors. The drones had been waiting. They had let him get close. Then they killed him. His last transmission was 2 words: too many. Across northern Russia, the same scenario played out again and again. Fighters reached intercept positions and were overwhelmed by drone escorts. Surface-to-air missiles launched and were decoyed or jammed. The few that got through hit bombers that were already damaged but kept flying, their redundant systems keeping them in the air long enough to reach launch range. At 4:15 a.m. Moscow time, the first American bombers reached their launch points. They did not cross into Russian airspace. They did not need to. At ranges between 200 and 400 miles from their targets, the bombers opened their weapons bays and released their payloads. AGM-158 JASSM cruise missiles. Stealthy, GPS-guided, each carrying a 1,000-pound warhead. Each bomber carried 20. In the space of 6 minutes, over 3,000 cruise missiles were launched toward targets across Russia. Military command centers, air defense nodes, communication hubs, power stations, ammunition depots, naval bases, every piece of infrastructure that allowed Russia to fight a modern war. The missiles flew low, hugging the terrain, their radar signatures barely larger than birds. They flew in waves, timing their arrivals so that the first wave would suppress air defenses and the second wave would destroy targets. Russian air defense crews watched them come on radar. Thousands of small contacts, all moving at 600 miles per hour, all heading toward them. They fired everything they had. In the 8 minutes before the first missiles hit, Russian forces launched over 4,000 surface-to-air missiles. They achieved a 40% intercept rate, one of the highest in military history. It was not enough. At 4:47 a.m. Moscow time, as the sun began to rise over the Ural Mountains, the first cruise missiles found their targets. The war had begun. 3,000 miles away in the Yellow Sea, American carrier-based aircraft were launching their own strikes against Chinese coastal defenses. In the South China Sea, B-1 bombers were releasing their weapons against Chinese naval bases. In the Taiwan Strait, submarines were firing Tomahawk missiles at command centers. The attacks were simultaneous, coordinated, overwhelming, and they were just the beginning. Because at 5:03 a.m. Moscow time, Russian satellite surveillance detected something that should not have been possible. A second wave of American bombers, as large as the first, was approaching from the south. They had come through European airspace, through corridors that should have been closed, through countries that had sworn neutrality. The Russian duty officer who reported this to Moscow did not understand how it was possible. But it was possible because those countries had not sworn neutrality. They had been lying, preparing, waiting for this moment. Poland, Romania, the Baltic states. All of them had secretly agreed to allow American bombers through their airspace when the time came. And the time had come. At 5:15 a.m. Moscow time, Colonel Volkov, still at his post in the underground command center, was staring at his displays when something else appeared. New contacts, moving faster than anything he had ever seen. Not bombers, not cruise missiles, not drones. Something else. The radar showed them accelerating past Mach 5, then Mach 7, then Mach 10. Hypersonic weapons, dozens of them, launched from platforms the Russian satellites had never detected. They were heading toward Moscow, toward Petersburg, toward every major command center in Western Russia. Impact time, 11 minutes. Volkov reached for the phone to report this new threat. Before he could lift the receiver, the lights went out. Not just in his facility, everywhere. The first wave of cruise missiles had hit the power grid. Across Western Russia, 60% of electrical generation went offline in less than 3 minutes. Emergency generators kicked in, but they were designed for individual facilities, not entire regions. The coordination that air defense required, the real-time data sharing, the split-second communication, all of it depended on infrastructure that was suddenly gone. In the darkness of the command center, Volkov watched his displays flicker and die. Outside, above the granite and concrete, the sky was filling with streaks of light. The hypersonic weapons, glowing from atmospheric friction, descending like meteors. In Beijing, General Li Chen was receiving similar reports. American cruise missiles inbound from multiple directions. Hypersonic weapons detected. Naval bombardment from carrier groups. Cyber attacks taking down communication networks. But there was something else in the reports. Something that did not make sense. Multiple ground stations were reporting unusual seismic activity. Not from missile impacts. Something else. Something rhythmic. Like machinery operating underground. The reports were coming from across China, from the interior, from regions that had not been attacked yet. General Li pulled up the locations on his map. They formed a pattern, a grid, and then he understood. Those were not natural seismic events. They were artificial. They were coming from facilities that officially did not exist, facilities that China had built in secret over the past decade. Underground weapons factories, hundreds of them, all activated simultaneously. But they were not Chinese factories. General Li's blood ran cold as the truth hit him. America had not just infiltrated Chinese intelligence, they had infiltrated Chinese industry. For years, perhaps decades, they had been building facilities inside China itself, disguised as civilian infrastructure, operated by people who did not know they were working for the Americans. And now those facilities were activating, not to produce weapons for China, to produce weapons for America. Inside Chinese territory, behind every defensive line, impossible to target, impossible to stop. The invasion was not coming from outside. It was already inside. General Li reached for his phone to warn the leadership, but like Volkov 3,000 miles away, he found the line dead. The communication networks were gone, not damaged, erased. Cyber attacks of a sophistication that should not have been possible had swept through Chinese systems in the seconds after the first missiles launched. Every server, every router, every satellite link, locked out or destroyed. China's military had just been blinded, deafened, and muted, and the American bombers were still 200 miles from the coast. At a U.S. Strategic Command Center buried beneath Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, the senior officer monitoring Operation Northern Thunder checked his timeline. 6:47 a.m. Moscow time. 5:47 p.m. Eastern Time, October 12th. Phase 1 complete. 12 hours ahead of schedule, Phase 2 initiating. He watched the displays showing thousands of military assets moving into position. Watched the casualty estimates climb. Watched the probability matrices shift overwhelmingly in favor of American success. Everything was proceeding as planned. But even he did not know about Phase 3. That information was compartmentalized at a level above his clearance. Above everyone's clearance, except for 12 people in the entire U.S. military command structure. Phase 3 was the reason America had been so confident. The reason they had moved so boldly. The reason they knew they could win. And Phase 3 was about to begin. In Alaska, Marcus Webb's brother Robert was standing in his driveway, looking north. He had not heard from Marcus since the phone call that morning. He was worried. The sky above Anchorage was clear. Stars were beginning to appear as twilight faded. And then Robert saw something that made him question his sanity. A line of light appeared on the northern horizon, not like the aurora borealis, sharper, more defined, artificial. As he watched, the line grew brighter and longer, stretching from east to west across the entire northern sky. It looked like the sky was tearing open. Robert pulled out his phone to record it, but his phone was dead. Not out of battery, just dead. The screen would not turn on. He ran inside to get his camera, but when he came back outside, the light was gone. The sky was normal again, but something had changed. Robert could feel it, a pressure in the air, a hum that was more felt than heard. Around Anchorage, around Alaska, around the Arctic, people were experiencing the same thing. Something had activated, something big enough to be felt hundreds of miles away, and whatever it was pointed at Russia and China. This was frequency 404. Marcus Webb saw the beginning of the war. He saw the conventional forces, the ships, the bombers, the visible machinery of American military power. He did not live to see what came next. But what came next was the reason America had been so certain of victory. The reason they had moved so boldly. The reason the Sino-Russian coalition was about to discover that everything they thought they knew about modern warfare was wrong. Phase 3 was not about more bombers or more missiles or more ships. Phase 3 was about weapons that should not exist yet. Technology that was decades ahead of anything either side had publicly acknowledged. Systems that had been built in secret. Tested in places that did not appear on any map. Funded by black budgets so deeply buried that even Congress did not know they existed. And now, as the sun rose over Russia and set over Alaska, as the conventional war raged across 2 continents, as the world watched the largest military operation since World War II unfold, Phase 3 began, and the sky opened.